Hello and welcome. This is Beth Ramsden Crafts. I'm Beth Ramsden, and today I'm going to be showing you how we can turn some cheap and cheerful Christmas socks into a Christmas jumper for Blythe. These socks cost just £1, and I chose one with a relatively small Christmas design on the lower part, and it's got this cute penguin face on the top. Here is my plan. Feel free to come back to this part of the video if you're going to follow along with me. Just deciding if I will use the penguin face or the pattern side for the body. Okay, so I'm going with the penguin side. And first I need to cut off the ribbed part at the top of the sock. I'll keep this because I'll be able to use it for the collar and cuffs later on. I'm measuring about 10 centimeters down from my first cut, and this should be long enough for the body of the jumper. Now, I'd forgotten in my plan about the heel of the sock, so I'm actually just going to cut this part off, so as close as I can to the part that sticks out. And again, I'm going to measure about 8 centimeters down from that cut. Now, this is the part that's going to become the arms. And now I come back to the cuff. I'm going to snip it open and fold it out. It's got this very light kind of overlocking stitch when it's been made. And I'm actually going to cut this in half, although if you want thicker cuffs, you could leave it whole. And I'm just working out here how tight I can get it, because I want it to be quite a sort of gathered effect at the bottom of the jumper. Now I'm going to fold this back in on itself. And I'm going to sew this part closed to make it into a loop before I attach it to the body of the jumper. I'm just using a back stitch, which is the best thing to use when you're sewing, when you're hand sewing with any jersey or stretch fabric. Here it is now in a loop. And what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to put the body of the jumper around this container to sort of hold it open for me. And I will stretch I've got that the wrong way around there, with all the raw edges together. It's all kind of stretched out together, and while it's held in place, I'm going to back stitch all of the way around the jumper. And I'm just going to knot it at the end. Now you'll see when I take it off, because we sewed it with the right sides together, it now folds down to make a lovely little hem for the bottom of the jumper. Now I'm actually going to cut the arm tube in half, and then I will sew the hems onto the ends of the arms in the same way or a similar way I did for the body, using the ribbed top from the top of the sock. Now here's the other half of the part I cut earlier, with a little left over. I wonder if this actually is long enough to be a wrist cuff. Yes, I think I'll get away with that. And there's some printed lettering on the ribbed part here that I won't be able to use, so I'm just trimming close to that, and hopefully I can use the rest of this for the neckline, and then the whole thing will have been made from one sock. Yes, that looks like it'll be long enough to do the neckline. So now I'm going to fold in half the ribbing and pin it in place. Because we're working with a flat part now, I'm going to have to manually stretch out the ribbing as I sew, so it's a little bit trickier than using the paint tube that I used before. So I'm going to hold it out like that as I sew. I'm just going to pop another pin in the middle there, and you can see that there's excess that will be stretched out. Okay, we start with a knot at the beginning, and in the same way I'm using back stitch again because it's a stitch that loops back on itself. With every stitch it has that extra stretch, which means you shouldn't snap your stitches as the fabric gets stretched and pulled at. There we go, one little cuff, and then we're just going to repeat that exactly the same for the other side. Okay, and that's the second sleeve cuff sewn on, and now we're going to fold the sleeve in half and pin where we're going to sew. Bring the cuff out the way, and this is the part we're going to trim and sew. I've left this top open from the pinning, and I'm just roughly rounding it out. I'm snipping in ever so slightly and essentially just trimming off this corner to create a classic kind of shoulder shape. And repeat with the other sleeve, and there we are. It just gives it the right angle when the sleeve is sewn in, so it's not sticking straight out from the body. And again, I'm hand sewing everything because if you'll have seen my last video, my sewing machine has spontaneously broken itself. So I am back stitching all the way along up to the point where I trimmed off the corner. So I just tie a knot here where I made that cut from. And there we go. You can turn this out and see what your finished sleeve will look like. I've done my best to line up the pattern as well, not too bad. And we'll repeat for the other sleeve, starting at the cuff, back stitching all the way up again to the area that was cut. Now I'm going to cut slits into the body for the sleeves. So I'm just working out roughly a little bit longer than the actual opening of the sleeves because there will need to be a shoulder seam sewed in at the top of the sleeves, which you'll see momentarily. I'm turning it inside out, and what I'll do is pop the sleeve inside with the top aligned to the top. I'm popping another pin in here. This is where the shoulder will be sewn in a little later. And I've just popped my finger in to hold it all open, and I'm just sewing through the body and the sleeve using a back stitch once again, and I'm going to go all the way around back to this starting point under the armpit. I'm just kind of passing through and under where this shoulder seam is going to be later, and continue my back stitch and finish with a knot or two. And I repeat just the same for the other sleeve. So they're both inside the body now. Pop a pin in the shoulder, and again I like to start at the armpit, so all the way around and not at the armpit again. Now I'm going to be using this tulle or netting fabric. Very hard to see, I'm afraid, on camera, but it's just a rough rectangle. Take out these pins. I'm turning the whole jumper the right way out. You can see these sleeves looking good. Very nice. And I'm going to, with my white gel pen, just so it shows up here, mark out 2 parallel lines, which I'll be sewing along in a moment. And I put the tulle fabric on top, and this is going to serve as a very light but kind of stretchy interfacing, so that I can turn this, what will be the back opening, the right way around. So I'll sew all the way around and snip down in between these 2 lines. Now I have more tulle here than I need, but I will be trimming it down afterwards. So again, just a quick back stitch all the way down, across and back up these 2 parallel lines, slightly to the outside of the pen mark, just so you don't see it when it's turned around. Now I'm snipping off some of the excess tulle at the top, and now very careful not to snip any of your stitches. And I'm cutting a little sort of triangle or a Y shape at the end there to help it turn round. And then we just turn the tulle round to the inside, and you'll see it neatens off this raw edge, pulls it round to the inside. And what I'll do next is to top stitch around this opening, just to hold it all flat, and then the shoulder seams. So here we go. I'm using a grey thread and doing just tiny little stitches, so you barely see it at all. And here's the opening when it's finished. Now I'm going to turn the jumper inside out again, and I'm trimming down this tulle fabric and putting the pins back in where the shoulder seams are going to go. So I'm going to sew to actually catch the edge of this tulle fabric to keep it in place. Now I'm only sewing about 1 centimetre or so. I suppose it'll depend on exactly the size of the sock that you're using. But as you can see, it's just a little bit of each side, and then there's plenty left for the neckline. So you're not fighting with a really tiny neck. Here's it the right way around. Looking really good so far. You can see it's very simple, quite a flat neckline. Now you could top stitch it there and call it done, but I want to add in this ribbing and give it a more finished off look. So the first thing I'm going to do, because I'll be ending up with an opening to deal with, what I'm going to do is enclose the 2 sides of this neck piece so I don't have raw edges. And I'm pinning it in place from the middle and then the 2 sides. And now I'm back stitching all the way along. I've got all these raw edges lined up once again. then a knot at the end and trim. And you can see when I flip this round, we have our collar. Now all I need is some sort of fastening at the back. Again, you've got lots of options. You could put a zip in at this point, hand stitch one in, or you could put Velcro, some overlapping Velcro in the back. What I would like to use is a button and loop. So I'm going to get some embroidery thread. Here we go, I've had a rummage and I've got a couple of tiny red buttons. They're just a few millimeters big. Here they are. And I've got this grey embroidery thread, which I will use for the loop. Now I'll link above a video where I show this process in some more detail, but I'm essentially creating a loop of thread, roughly the size I want. I'm imagining a button on the other side, and the loop needs to be big enough to get around it. And then I'm going to put the thread through to create a second loop right on top of this one, just for added strength. There. And now I am creating a series of knots going around these two loops, which create a sort of decorative edge to it, keeping it together nice and strong. Then I'm moving the thread down to create a second loop. As you'll see here, and then another loop right the same size on top of that. And again, I'm creating these knots always in the same direction, from the back and then from front to back, one after the other, and it just creates this whole string of knots which make this a really attractive looking button loop. Then I take the thread to the inside and knot it off. Now I just need to sew in the buttons. Here I'm going to use some red thread and just sew them into place. I'm wrapping the thread around before I do the final knot on the button. It's probably not necessary for doll clothes, but I'm used to sewing buttons this way in real life. And there we go, just double check that I can get these loops around. And there we have our finished jumper, front and back, looking adorable. Now Blythe needs to try it on. Here we go. Isn't she cute? She's all cozy and looking very festive with her pixie Christmas hat, some handmade leather boots, another video that I will link at the top here. You can see how they were made. Here she is, all dressed up, and she's ready to meet her friend under the Christmas tree and exchange some Christmas presents. Let's go see them. Aren't they lovely? Well, thank you very much for watching. I do hope you will give this a try yourselves. It's been a year like no other, and I wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and I will see you in the next video in the new year. Thank you for subscribing and watching and all your lovely comments. See you then. Bye-bye.